I never imagined that the sound of a champagne cork popping would be the sound of my heart breaking. But there I was, standing in the shadowed hallway of the estate I had built with 40 years of sweat and sacrifice, listening to the people I loved most, celebrating my death before I had even taken my last breath. My hand gripped the mahogany railing, my knuckles turning white as laughter drifted from the dining room. A room where I had once fed them, sheltered them, and promised them the world. I wanted to storm in there. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. But I knew that anger without a plan is just noise, and noise does not win wars. I needed to be silent. I needed to be invisible. Because what I was about to do required the kind of cold calculation that only a father pushed to the edge possesses. Before I explain how I turned their celebration into a funeral for their greed, let me take you back to the moment I made the mistake of opening my door. But before we continue, I have a small request. If you believe that loyalty still matters in this world, please like this video. It helps more people than you know, and if you are watching from a place where family comes first, comment below with your country's name. I read every single one. Finally, if you want to see justice served to those who deserve it, please subscribe to the channel. My life, up until 3 years ago, was defined by two things: my construction empire and my silence. Since my wife passed, the silence in my large home in the Virginia countryside had become deafening. I was 72, healthy enough to still visit job sites, but old enough to feel the ache in my bones when the rain came. I had money, certainly, more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But wealth is a poor substitute for conversation at the breakfast table. That is why when my daughter Natalie called me out of the blue, I felt a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. Natalie had always been independent, perhaps to a fault, moving across the country in her 20s to find herself. We drifted apart, not out of malice, but out of negligence. When she told me she was moving back to the East Coast with her husband Mason, and that they wanted to be closer to me, I didn't question it. I didn't ask why the sudden change of heart. I just saw my little girl coming home. It is a dangerous thing, the blindness of a parent's love. It filters out the red flags and paints everything in shades of forgiveness. I was so eager to not be alone that I forgot to ask if they were coming for me or for what I had. Mason was charming. I have to give him that. He was the kind of man who knew exactly how firm to shake your hand and exactly when to laugh at a joke he didn't find funny. He worked in finance or consulting or one of those modern professions that seem to involve a lot of phone calls and very little tangible work. When they first visited for dinner, Mason spent the entire evening asking about the history of the house, the value of the land, and the intricacies of my business trust. At the time, I mistook his interrogation for interest. I thought he was impressed by what I had built. I invited them to stay in the guest wing while they looked for a house. A week turned into a month. A month turned into a permanent arrangement. Why buy a new place when this estate is so huge? Mason argued one night over brandy. Natalie is happier here, Benjamin. And you, well, you shouldn't be alone at your age. It sounded like concern. It sounded like family stepping up. I agreed. I signed the paperwork to add them to the household accounts to handle groceries and utilities. I thought I was gaining a son. I didn't realize I was inviting a fox into the henhouse. The changes were subtle at first, like water seeping into a basement foundation. It started with furniture. My old leather armchair, the one my wife bought me for our 30th anniversary, disappeared one afternoon while I was at the doctor. "It was gathering dust, Dad," Natalie said, avoiding my eyes. "Mason bought you this ergonomic recliner. It's better for your back." I didn't like the new chair. It was cold and stiff. But I didn't want to be ungrateful. Then, it was the staff. Mrs. Higgins, who had cleaned my house for 20 years, was let go. Mason claimed he found a cleaning service that was more efficient and cost-effective. I missed Mrs. Higgins. She knew how I liked my coffee. The new crew were strangers who moved through my house like ghosts, touching my things with indifferent hands. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. I would walk into a room and conversation would stop. Natalie seemed perpetually stressed, always looking at Mason for approval before she spoke to me. I told myself it was just the adjustment period. I told myself that young people do things differently. But deep down, a quiet alarm was starting to ring in the back of my mind. The first time Mason truly showed his teeth was over the vintage car collection. I had 3 classic cars in the garage, restored with my own hands. One Saturday, I went down to wax the Mustang, only to find the garage empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought we had been robbed. I rushed into the house, calling for Natalie. It was Mason who answered, sitting at my desk, typing on my computer. "Oh, the cars?" he said, not even looking up. "I moved them to a storage facility in the city. The garage needed to be cleared out for my home gym." I stood there, stunned. He hadn't asked. He hadn't suggested. He had just done it. "Those are my cars, Mason," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and shock. He finally looked at me, a patronizing smile playing on his lips. "Benjamin, be realistic. You don't drive them. They're fire hazards. I'm just thinking of your safety. If you are listening to this and you would never, ever treat a parent with such disrespect, please touch the subscribe button right now. It shows me that there are still good people left in this world who understand honor." After the car incident, the isolation began in earnest. My friends stopped calling. When I ran into my old fishing buddy, Greg, at the pharmacy, he looked surprised to see me. "I thought you were bedridden, Ben," he said. "Mason told us you were dealing with severe dementia and didn't want visitors." I felt the blood drain from my face. Dementia? I was sharp as a tack. I realized then that Mason wasn't just taking over my space. He was erasing my existence. He was cutting my lifelines one by one. I confronted Natalie about it that night. She cried, wringing her hands. "Mason is just trying to protect your dignity, Dad. You have been forgetful lately." I stared at her. Had I been forgetful? Or was that just what they were telling me? It is a terrifying thing when the people you trust start to rewrite your reality. You start to question your own mind. You start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you really are the burden they say you are. I retreated to my study, only to find that Mason had changed the Wi-Fi password. "Limit screen time," he said. "Good for the brain." I was being quarantined in a prison without bars. My health actually did start to decline, but I suspect it was from stress and heartbreak rather than age. I developed a tremor in my hands. I had trouble sleeping. Mason used this as ammunition. He insisted I see a new doctor, a friend of his from the club. This doctor prescribed me sedatives that left me foggy and lethargic. I spent days drifting in and out of sleep in the sunroom, watching the seasons change through the glass. Mason took over the business meetings. "Benjamin is indisposed," he would tell my partners. "I am acting as his proxy." I found out later he was draining the company accounts, funneling money into shell corporations under the guise of modernization. I was too drugged to fight him. I would wake up to find legal documents on my bedside table, with post-it notes saying, "Sign here, Dad." And to my eternal shame, sometimes I did. I signed because I just wanted the nagging to stop. I signed because I wanted them to smile at me again. It is pathetic what loneliness will make a man do. The turning point came on a Tuesday in November. I had skipped my afternoon dose of pills, flushing them down the toilet when the nurse wasn't looking. My mind was clearer than it had been in months. I walked quietly down the hallway, intending to get a glass of water. The door to the library, my library, was ajar. I heard Mason's voice, loud and boasting. He wasn't talking to Natalie, he was on the phone. I froze in the shadows, pressing my back against the cold wall. "Yeah, the old man is practically a vegetable," Mason laughed. "It's a waiting game now. The doctors say maybe 6 months. But with the stress I'm putting him under, maybe less." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Then he said the words that woke me up from my stupor. "I overheard my son-in-law bragging about my inheritance, so I made one change to my will that ruined his plan." He continued, "The portfolio is massive. Once he kicks the bucket, I'm liquidating the construction firm, selling the land to developers. We're talking 50 million, easy. Natalie will sign whatever I tell her to. She's as weak as he is." Hearing him call my daughter weak hurt more than hearing him wish for my death. But hearing his plan to dismantle my life's work ignited a fire in my belly that I hadn't felt in 20 years. I didn't confront him. I didn't burst in. I crept back to my room, my heart pounding a war rhythm. I knew I couldn't just fire him or kick him out. He had power of attorney. He had the doctors in his pocket. He had manipulated Natalie so thoroughly that she would view any attack on him as an attack on her. I decided to play the part. The next morning, I feigned a dizzy spell. I let myself collapse at the breakfast table, knocking over a pitcher of orange juice. Mason didn't rush to help me. He sighed, looked at his watch, and said, "Natalie, call the ambulance. This is it." I was taken to the hospital. While the doctors ran tests, I saw Mason in the corner of the room, texting furiously. He wasn't worried. He was excited. He was planning the victory party. I spent 3 days in the hospital. The tests came back inconclusive, of course, because there was nothing physically wrong with me other than the sedatives I had stopped taking. But I played up the frailty. I slurred my speech. I pretended not to recognize the nurse. When Natalie visited, she looked guilty, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered when Mason went to get coffee. "I'm so sorry." "For what, sweetheart?" I asked, testing her. "For everything. It's just so hard." She didn't have the courage to tell me the truth. She was drowning, but she was too afraid to grab the life raft. When I was discharged, Mason was annoyed. He clearly had hoped I wouldn't be coming back. "Well," he said as he wheeled me out, "back to the grind. We'll have to set up a hospital bed in the dining room. The stairs are too much for him now." He was moving me out of the living quarters entirely. The dining room bed was humiliating. I was on display like a dying exhibit. Mason hosted dinner parties with his friends while I lay 10 feet away behind a thin partition. I heard them drinking my wine, eating food paid for with my money, laughing about their ski trips and new investments. I was the ghost at the feast. But the dining room location had one advantage. It was central. I could hear everything. I learned the codes to the new security system Mason installed. I learned where he kept the key to the safe. And most importantly, I learned the date of his big announcement. He was planning a gala at the estate to announce a merger that relied on using my company's assets as collateral. a merger he could only legally authorize if I was declared mentally incompetent or dead. He had a psychiatrist coming the morning of the gala to sign the competency papers. I needed an ally. I tried to reach Natalie one afternoon when Mason was golfing. "Natalie," I said, sitting up in the hospital bed. "You know he's stealing from the company, don't you?" Natalie flinched. She looked at the door, terrified. "Dad, don't say that. Mason is saving the company. You're just confused." "I am not confused," I snapped, dropping the act for a second. "He is selling it off for parts. Natalie, look at me. Is this what you want? To see your father treated like a dog?" She started to cry, shaking her head. "I can't leave him, Dad. He controls everything. The accounts, the house. I signed papers I didn't understand. If I leave, I have nothing." I realized then that she was as much a prisoner as I was. Mason had trapped us both. Saving myself wasn't enough. I had to save her too, even if she was too weak to help me do it. 2 days before the gala, Mason came into the dining room. He stood over my bed, blocking out the light. "Benjamin," he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "the doctor says you're getting worse. After the party on Saturday, we're going to move you to a facility. It's called Shady Pines. It's affordable." I knew Shady Pines. It was a state-run warehouse for the forgotten. It was a death sentence. "I don't want to go," I whispered, making my lower lip tremble. "It's not up to you anymore." Mason grinned, a cruel, predatory expression. "You're not capable of making decisions. Natalie agrees it's for the best. Don't worry, we'll visit. On holidays." He patted my cheek, a sharp, stinging pat, and walked away whistling. The clock was ticking. I had 48 hours to execute my plan. Opportunity struck the next day. Mason went into the city to finalize the catering, and Natalie was in the garden. I knew the night nurse, a woman named Elena, was not on Mason's payroll. She was an agency hire, and she had always been kind to me. "Elena," I said, dropping the slur completely, "I need to borrow your phone, and I need you to not ask me why." She looked at me, shocked by the clarity of my voice. She hesitated, looking at the security camera in the corner. "The blind spot is by the pantry," I whispered. She nodded slowly, helped me to the pantry, and handed me her phone. I didn't call the police. I called my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. Sterling had been my attorney for 30 years, but Mason had blocked his calls. "Benjamin?" Sterling gasped. "I was told you were in a coma." "Listen to me closely," I said. "I am alive. I am sane. And I need you to bring the notary and the video equipment to the service entrance tonight at 2 a.m. We are going to rewrite the future." The night of the gala arrived. The house was transformed. Expensive lights, catered food, a live band. Strangers filled my hallways, drinking champagne. I was dressed in a tuxedo Mason had forced me into, propped up in a wheelchair in the corner like a prop. "Look at him," I heard Mason tell an investor. "Built the company from nothing. Sad to see him go, but the future is bright." I sat there, drooling slightly on purpose, watching Mason work the room. He was in his element. He felt untouchable. Natalie stood by his side, looking pale and miserable in a dress that cost more than my first car. The psychiatrist was there, sipping scotch, the clipboard with the competency papers ready on a side table. Mason tapped his glass with a spoon. The room went silent. "Friends, colleagues," he began. "Thank you for coming. Tonight marks a new chapter." I waited for him to finish his speech about taking the helm. He raised a toast to me, To Benjamin, the founder." The room applauded. That was my cue. I didn't clap. I slowly, deliberately wiped the drool from my chin. I sat up straight in the wheelchair. I locked eyes with Mason. And then I stood up. A gasp rippled through the room. Mason froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Benjamin," he stammered, You shouldn't be standing." I walked to the center of the room. My legs were weak, but my will was iron. "I think I should," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Especially since I am the host." I signaled to the back entrance. Mr. Sterling walked in, flanked by 2 private security guards and a sheriff's deputy. "What is this?" Mason hissed, stepping toward me. "He's having an episode. Doctor, sedate him." The corrupt psychiatrist stepped forward, but the deputy blocked him. "Mason," I said calmly, "there will be no sedation tonight, only illumination." Mr. Sterling opened a leather folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "my son-in-law has gathered you here to celebrate his acquisition of my company. However, there has been a slight administrative change." Mason laughed nervously. "Dad, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." "The embarrassment is only beginning," I replied. "Mr. Sterling, please read the amendment to the trust I signed and notarized 48 hours ago." Sterling cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, the entirety of Benjamin's estate, including the construction firm, the land, and all liquid assets, is placed into a irrevocable charitable trust." The room went deadly silent. Mason's face turned purple. "You can't do that. I have power of attorney." "Revoked," Sterling said. "We have video evidence of Benjamin's mental competency recorded 2 nights ago, along with a toxicology report from an independent lab confirming he was being over-medicated against his will." Sterling continued reading. "The trust stipulates that the company will be run by a board of directors appointed by Benjamin. No family member by blood or marriage may hold a paid position or access company funds." You old fool!" Mason screamed, lunging at me. The security guards grabbed him before he could touch me. "I built this deal. I spent the money already. You can't cut me out." "I didn't just cut you out, Mason," I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. "I buried you. The forensic accountants are already looking at the unauthorized transfers you made. That's embezzlement. That's prison." Mason looked at the sheriff, then at the investors, who were already backing away, checking their phones, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. He turned to Natalie. "Do something. Tell them he's crazy." Natalie looked at me. Then she looked at her husband, the man who had bullied her into submission. She took a deep breath. "He doesn't look crazy to me, Mason," she said softly. "He looks like my father." The police escorted Mason out in handcuffs, not for the embezzlement. That would come later. But for the assault he attempted in front of 50 witnesses. The party ended abruptly. The champagne went flat. But as the last guest left, the silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Natalie cried for days. She apologized until she had no voice left. I didn't kick her out. I didn't punish her. She had been punished enough by loving a monster. We are rebuilding, slowly. I fired the corrupt staff, brought Mrs. Higgins back, and moved my armchair back to the living room. I learned a hard lesson that year. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. And sometimes, you have to be willing to burn your own house down to get rid of the rats living in the walls. If you believe that no parent should ever be exploited by their children, and if this story made you want to call your folks just to say hello, please subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing. but it means everything to me. Thank you for watching.